Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. You're here with Rosie Gilmoss, and my special guest this week is Elizabeth Rosmer. Hello, Elizabeth. You're all the way from Michigan, aren't you?
I am, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me, especially as it's a fairly ungodly hour at your end, isn't it? So, Elizabeth, we are Facebook friends, so I have a little bit of an awareness of your story, and I know that your husband, Mike, he died of cancer back in 2016, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, and he was just 34. I mean, that is no age at all, is it?
No.
None. So, firstly, I'm very sorry that you are in this club with us, and I'm very grateful to you for coming on and having the courage to share your story, because I do believe that there is empowerment in doing this, and what you do by sharing your story is you give other people strength. So what you're doing is incredibly brave and incredibly worthwhile. So without further ado, would you be kind enough just to tell me what led you to this club, please?
Yes, for sure. Well, as you said, I lost my husband, Mike, in 2016, and we had been together for 17 years. And as you said, we were 34 when he passed away. We were both 34. So that was half of our life together. We had met in the 6th grade and started dating our senior year of high school. We had dated for a day in 8th grade and a weekend in 9th grade and finally got it together our senior year. But we dated long distance throughout college, with him taking the bus 8 hours round trip to come see me every other weekend for the first few years. And then I finally got a car and would go visit him. And then we got married 2 weeks out of college when I was 21 and he was 22. And we spent 12 years together, married, 17 years together total. And right before he was diagnosed with sarcoma, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary, and we did a big vow renewal with all of our family and friends, and the dress, the makeup, the whole thing. I always like to be the center of attention as much as possible. So it was
I can relate, Elizabeth. You've seen my sequin wardrobe, right?
Yes.
I've only been married to 2.5 years to John, and I'm already thinking there's got to be some sort of sequin Vegas renewal.
Exactly. Love it.
Yeah, so that's...
Yes. Well, why not, right? We both know how short life is, so you have to dress up and celebrate as much as you possibly can.
Do you know what? This is why I do the ridiculous things. I wear sequins every day for December and things like this, because I just, many of us have got this wardrobe full of fantastic clothes that we maybe wear once or twice, and I think, wear the bloody sequins. You don't know that there's another posh event coming up.
Right. I love it.
Wear your sequins, right?
I am going to see Taylor Swift, so I think you've inspired me. I might have to wear sequins to go see her.
I'm so jealous. I would love to see Taylor Swift. I'm very, very envious. But anyway, we digress. Right.
So we had our vow renewal, and we did the words again. We said in sickness and in health, and then kind of ironically, about a month later, he was having some pain. He had been having pain in his leg for a couple months, but he was a really active, healthy person. And he went into the doctor and they misdiagnosed him. They thought it was a hematoma because he had bumped it on like a weightlifting bench.
Yeah.
And that type of bump just wouldn't, cause that type of pain. But they didn't understand what was happening. And luckily, he had a friend who was a resident and a very smart person. And he was able to help. He didn't diagnose him because that wasn't his role, but he was able to kind of understand what might be happening and connect him with the correct doctor that could actually diagnose him. So he told me one day, he said, I talked to my friend and I think I'm going to go see the doctor. And he said, I don't know if you should go or not, but maybe you should go. And so we were actually going to go out of town to go see a concert. And so we went to the doctor's appointment before we were supposed to go out of town. And we went in and he was immediately put into the hospital and they took a biopsy. They said, we definitely think it's cancer. We have to confirm. And then 11 days later, he did come home from the hospital at that point, but 11 days later, he had 2 of his quadricep muscles removed in his right leg to take care of the tumor. So 2 of his quadricep muscles and the nerve were removed. So essentially he lost most use of his right leg for a little while. And this was a man who played basketball a couple times a week, weightlifted every day. It was a really big lifestyle change for him. and it was a lot to deal with mentally. But at that point, we did not know he was terminal. So he, we didn't do a lot of research on sarcoma because we didn't want to. We
Yeah.
knew it could be bad, but we figured he's strong, he's healthy, he can do this. So we focused on recovery. He actually earned his master's degree because he was in the middle of that while on chemo. So he had the surgery, he had radiation, a round of chemo, and all of this while we were planning on moving out of state. So we were driving back and forth. I had to become his driver because he couldn't drive. And it was a big life change. I ended up selling my business and kind of going into freelancing and supporting him. And then on the December 23rd, he was done with chemo, and we went in for a checkup with his doctor, and we thought everything was fine. We thought, okay, he beat this. We're going to move to the next state. We're going to continue our life. Yeah, you can't walk and run as well as you used to, but you can still move around and you're still you. And so we were pretty optimistic. I remember holding hands and like kind of giggling in the doctor's office because, we were pretty excited about Christmas and a lot of different things. And then the doctor came in and sat down with us, and he was kind of surprised at how giggly we were. And he said, "Oh, have you talked to your other doctor?" And we said, "Well, yeah, we've talked to him. We're fine." And he said, "No, you have spots on your lungs. This is terminal." And we were like, "What?" Like it was insane to think of, and took us a little bit to wrap our minds around. So we went to lunch at our favorite restaurant, and we kind of wrapped our minds around it, and we decided not to tell family and friends until after Christmas and until after we had confirmed it through a couple other second opinion.
Yeah.
And then in February, we started telling people that he had cancer, or that he was terminal. He went through 2 more rounds of chemo, which put him in the hospital. He went on hospice briefly because he decided that he'd rather have palliative care. And then there was a clinical trial that he was able to get onto, and that gave him another year of good quality life. He, saw friends, saw family. So as I mentioned, he was a pretty active guy, and he was very competitive, very type A. And while he was in the hospital, a friend of his, I don't know if you guys have this in England, but have you heard of the card game Magic the Gathering?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So it's a little on the same line as like Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
It doesn't have a storyline, but basically it's a battle game where you have these cards and you pit these magical cards against each other, and you kind of build an army of cards, and then with your army, you try to defeat the other army. And it's really complex, and it's very nerdy.
I'm just thinking that at least one of my sons is going to love this.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going
it's
to be
wonderful.
searching for this.
Yes. And it can get very expensive if you...
Maybe not then. Maybe
Yeah.
stick to Pokemon.
Yeah. So while he was in the hospital, one of his friends from college brought a couple packs of Magic cards. And I swear it prolonged his life, because instead of playing basketball, instead of lifting at the gym, all of a sudden he was playing Magic cards with his friends from college, his friends from high school, friends from work, my family members that he was very close to. They would all gather at our house for monthly tournaments, and we'd get pizza, and that became his reason. He was no longer working. He would gather with this group of men that had become his brothers, and they would have these big fun parties. And I mean, there was a lot of competition. They would be mad at whoever won and whoever lost, but it really gave him a reason. And then on hard days, he could sit with his many cards and create these armies to defeat so and so's army, because everyone had their own personality, and your cards kind of reflect your personality. And so he really took that on as like a way to continue to interact with his friends and give him that competitive edge. And so I think that was huge. That was I even learned how to play. I did not play in the tournaments, but I did learn how to play.
This is probably like
So
me kind of being learning Pokemon by osmosis because it's talked about so much in my house.
yes, exactly.
And hearing you talk about how he had this group of male friends, that's quite unusual often, particularly in men, and particularly when they're going through a very difficult life experience. They tend to shut down and they don't want to talk about it. And I find talking to my sons particularly, if I'm in the car or we're doing something else, I get a lot more out of them. So you can understand why playing a card game would enable them to maybe talk about other things as well while they're kind of distracted by the card game. And that's very, very important, isn't it, having somebody to talk to?
oh yes, for sure. And I don't think yeah, I think he definitely shared a lot more than he would have. He didn't share a lot about his illness. He kept very optimistic. A lot of people said in the past few years that they had no idea how sick he was, which kind of made it, even though we knew it was happening, it was still almost a shock when he passed.
Yeah.
Not to me, but to some friends who hadn't seen him in a little bit. But yeah, he was the big personality. He was an only child, and he had a single mother, and he basically created his own families wherever he went. He, would adopt friends, and he would go to their parents' houses, and the typical like eat everything in their fridge, and he
Sounding a
was
lot
he
like
was that guy. Yeah, yeah. So that was, I mean, so those are, the years that he was sick were horrible because he was sick, and there was a lot of illness, and there was a lot of hospital visits, and a lot of is today going to be the day. But there was also a lot of joy and a lot of fun, and he and I had a lot of good experiences and good laughs, and we would have days where we just would sit around watching TV and laughing, and days where we would go and visit family and friends, and we one day decided to do a donut day, and we went around and I think we got four dozen donuts.
Oh my
And
God.
yes, yeah. Oh, he was go big or go home all the way. And so we got 4 dozen donuts, and I think we drove around to 18 family and friends' houses, dropping off donuts and making sure that everyone was like seen. That was, I might get a little teary here. That was one thing that he did really well in life, but also when he was sick, was that he made sure everyone else was okay and everyone else was prepared for his death, and including me. I got to really pre-grieve with him. I got to grieve him while holding him.
Oh.
I got to know that he wanted me to move on, and not move on. We don't use the word move on, but move forward. Move forward. He wanted me to move forward in love, in life, in everything. We did not have children because his cancer was, sarcoma is not genetic, but he actually was a lifelong cancer survivor. He was born with a genetic cancer called retinoblastoma, which is an eye cancer. And he was in remission since, I believe, the time he was 2. But sarcoma is something that can happen after this cancer. They are related, but we weren't prepared for it. Like, it wasn't something that, it usually happens in your teen years. So basically he was aware of those things, and we did get him checked for like an eye cancer a couple years before he did get his sarcoma, because we were aware of it, but we were mostly aware of, like, we were nervous about him getting like a brain tumor or eye cancer coming back. We really didn't, this one still kind of shocked us, but he, because he had the cancer and it was genetic, we did make the decision not to have genetic children because we didn't want to pass the cancer on. We did look into adopting for a while, but it wasn't the right time for us. And then now when I look back, nothing against anyone with children, I'm really grateful that we did not adopt, because if we had adopted, we were going to do it out of our foster system and have a sibling group and go big or go home. And we would have had those children for 2 years when he got sick. And so they would have been with us 4 years total before he died. And I just can't imagine the trauma of being in a foster care situation, then having a parent who gets sick, then having a parent who died. So I'm really grateful that didn't happen. But but there's, still a little bit of sadness that, we didn't have that experience together.
It's one of the many sort of secondary losses that people without children, particularly if they've wanted children, that they talk about, is this idea that, or even if you hadn't decided if you wanted children, just the fact that that option has been taken from you. But I just got to interject, because as you're talking there, and you're not talking about how difficult it would have been for you if you'd had children to navigate through. What you're talking about is how difficult it would have been for these kind of imaginary children. And that shows such a level of compassion and thought and kindness that you two must have had. And I mean, I'm hearing it all the way through this conversation, but I just wanted to pick up on that, because it really stuck with me that you weren't thinking, oh, poor me, I'd have been stuck with the children. You were thinking those poor children had been through enough, and that's very powerful.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think we did a good job of taking care of each other and taking care of the other people in our lives. We even did, speaking of children, we have there's a girl in our life. So our dear friends have a daughter, and she and Mike connected from like the moment she was born. He loved her so much. And I also have a cousin who was born around the same time, who was a boy who he also loves. So basically he was like, he picked his two little, for lack of a better word, godchildren before we had any nieces of our own, or any children of our own. And so these two just were the little boy and girl apple of his eye, and he had such a good relationship with them. And she was, I think, 5 or 6 when he got sick. And we sat down and we had a conversation with her parents, who, as I said, are our dear friends. And we said, is it healthy for us to still be in your life? Like, is it healthy for us to still be as close to you? Because I mean, there are friends, family, but they weren't, we don't see them at holidays and stuff like that. They didn't have to be in our life. And they said, no, we want you to be in her life. We want you to be a part of her life, even if we know that she's going to have to experience loss maybe earlier than she would have. You never know what's going to happen. So they made the conscious choice to allow Mike to have, her in his life. And we have such good memories with them and with that family. And, with so many people, we have a lot of people who really put a lot of their own life aside to be there for Mike and to be there for me. And we really had a deep bench and a deep community. Like anything we needed, we had. And it was, I know not everyone has that. And so I'm very grateful that we have
not everybody does, but that doesn't mean that you can't be grateful that you had it. And again, it probably speaks volumes about you and Mike. He's the kind of dude that went around dropping donuts off to people. Like, of course people loved it.
Right.
He sounds like an absolutely brilliant human being. The saddest thing about doing this job, actually, is that it does seem to be the brilliant human beings that it feels really unfair.
Yeah. So he eventually, I mean, he did pretty well on his clinical trial. He had to go about 2 hours away once a month to get this infusion, but a friend of his would bring him, because by that time I was working again. We decided that because we didn't know how long he was going to live, and because he was on Social Security, he looked at me one day and he said, well, you have to go back to work, because we can't just sit around and be sad all the time.
It's true. And hearing you even say the words, well, we didn't know how long he was going to live. It's like this kind of sentence becomes kind of second nature and normal conversation in our world.
Right.
Whereas anybody else, they'd be like, oh yeah, no,
yes.
I don't know how long my husband's got.
Right. Exactly. It's funny, but it's not funny.
Oh no, it's the dark humor, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's the life we have to live. So yep. So I went back to work, and then it was really interesting. About 6 months before he passed away, I had been working for maybe 6 months or so, and it was a new kind of job for me. I did my best, but I started kind of having, I guess I'd call them now, panic attacks, and I would get hysterical. And luckily not at work, but with Mike. And we decided I was going to quit. And luckily I had a boss at the time that was absolutely wonderful. And she said, we have mental health care for a reason. You should really look into going on short-term disability for your anxiety, or for, or you should look at short-term leave for medical care for your husband before you quit, because you can always quit. So I did that, and I actually was on short-term disability for my own mental health for a couple months. And then by that time, Mike had deteriorated to the point where I needed to be on leave to actually help care for him. So our last 6 months together, we got to spend together, and which was a lot of shuffling to and from doctor's appointments and a lot of care. He did have a couple additional surgeries and side effects that came up that had to be dealt with. He had radiation, and finally, we found out that the trial was no longer working. He had an injury, and I can't believe I'm going to tell this story, but so
Please do. This sounds good. I can tell by the way you're giggling.
oh, it is. So I hate to. It's a bittersweet story because it really was kind of the beginning of the end. But on Easter, we were going to go to my sister's house, and we started arguing about how a box was going to fit in the car, because he said it would fit. I said it wouldn't fit. He said, "You don't listen to me." And I said, "Well, you're wrong." We were in our cement garage, and he forgot he had only one working leg. And at the time, he could walk. He had a brace, but he kicked the box and fell on the garage floor and started yelling. And I calmly walked over, closed the garage door so the neighbor couldn't see him, sat next to him on the ground, and said, and I didn't say anything. I just waited. And he kind of like got done yelling and looked up at me, and he goes, "Well, that was an overreaction."
But I think he was probably allowed at this point, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yep, exactly. And he got up and he got into the car, and we never took the box. And we went and we had a lovely Easter with his mom and my family all in the same place. And it really, for my family and for his mom, it was one of their best last memories, because it was one of the last times he would looked healthy and was up and moving around and feeling good. And so after that was March of 2016. After that, things got a little more painful, a little harder. And then he passed away in July. But it was really interesting because we didn't go half in anything. So between March and July, even with him starting to decline, we had been looking for a house the house we lived in was great, but it was a kind of a small starter home. Mm-hmm. And he wanted me to be in a safer neighborhood, and he wanted to have a bigger house so I could have roommates if I wanted to, and just have, set me up for success in the next phase. And so we were still house searching, and while he was sick, we ended up selling our home, buying another home, and moving just about 20 minutes away, but moving 3 weeks before he passed away. And it became such an ordeal, but it was definitely indicative of who we were as people, because we went until the very end.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, my aunts ended up going to my aunt's house while I was selling the house, because he was having a bad day, and we didn't want him sitting on the couch, basically have to explain to people why there was a sick man on the couch of this house we were trying to sell. And so he went and sat with my aunts, and I told my aunt, I said, "Listen, he has signed a DNR. If anything happens to him, just call me. Don't call 911. Just let him die." And she looked at me and she was like, "What?" And it was terrible to say that, but the way I rattled it off, and he was like sitting there nodding, the way I rattled it off was like the way you describe to a babysitter how to put a kid to bed. I was like, don't give him too many snacks, and if he starts to seize, just let him die. Oh my God. I felt so bad. But the look on her face was one of those moments where you go, "Oh my God, this is not normal. This is not something that people usually go through."
Yeah, this is not your world, basically.
No.
Yes,
yep.
Yeah, that's how you feel sometimes. And just, sorry to interject again, I'm trying very hard not to, but, impulsive. Was that what he wanted? He wanted to die at home?
So he did end up dying at home. We moved, we got into hospice for the final time. He had a wonderful week in the house. We we got to hang out with friends, eat pizza. My parents and family came over to help kind of organize the place. We watched movies. We had a wonderful time. And then he started to kind of start to feel worse. And now when I look back, a lot of times when people are terminal, they'll have like, I can't remember the term of it, but there's a term, and they'll have like, it's called the surge. And I learned this from a TV show I watch. But basically, when someone's terminal, sometimes when their body's getting ready to die, they will have like a surge of energy that makes you feel like they're going to be okay, and makes you feel like they're going to it's kind of nice because you get a little glimpse of the old them, but it's kind of cruel because you get hope that they're going to be okay. And so he had a great week, and then things went downhill. His cancer had spread to his lungs, and that's what ultimately killed him. But he had started coughing up blood, and to him that was it. He said, I don't want to live like this. I don't want this to be the way I feel. I'm ready to call hospice and to start going on sedation and see, how that, see what we can do to make me comfortable. Because his breathing had gotten much worse, and he was coughing and he was in pain. And he was barely eating. That was the other thing. He could barely eat food. He was a huge eater. This man could eat like a pizza a day, twice. so, so for him to not eat, we knew that there was a problem. And so we called in hospice, and we started him on sedation drugs. He was on sedation for a week and a day. His wish was that the only people that saw him were me and the hospice workers. And especially in hearing from your podcast, how so many people in cancer deaths were surrounded by loved ones and families and friends. I get a little bit of sadness around that, because it would have been nice to have more support. Not that people would not have supported us. People wanted to be there, but he wanted to not have that. It was too much for his. Yeah. He was a big, strong, healthy guy that wanted to be remembered that way. So I respect what he wanted. But it was hard. And I'm really grateful that I was able to give him that gift of honoring what he wanted. But it was difficult. But my mom moved into my house a day or two after he went under sedation, and she stayed in the upstairs, and we stayed in the downstairs, and I took care of him, and she took care of me. So I was really grateful that she was able to kind of drop everything from her life and come down and do that. She lived a couple hours away at the time. And she would go out one morning. They have something called terminal restlessness that if you don't know about it, it's terrifying. But if you do know about it, you can kind of manage it. But the person who's dying starts asking for things that are maybe a little unreasonable or a little out of the blue. And then, you feel like it's their dying request. You need to get it for them. And the thing that he asked for was Haribo peaches, which is those little gummy peaches. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I love that, boys. Yeah.
I've never known this man to eat a Haribo peach in his entire life. And all of a sudden at 5 a.m., he's like, I need Haribo peaches. And he could barely talk because his throat was relaxed and everything was like, he's on all these huge drugs. And like he was on, at one point, he was on fentanyl, Versed, and ketamine. It was insane. And yeah, and he kept metabolizing the drugs because other than his lungs, he was really healthy. So it was a problem because he kept metabolizing it, and we needed to give him more and more drugs. And they said, this might kill him. And I said, isn't that the point? And they said, no, that's not the point. So they were very careful, and we were doing everything we needed to do legally and everything. But it was so funny. I was like, they're like, well, he might die with this next dose. Yes. I was like, okay. Like,
there's a real irony there, isn't there?
Yes.
But what's the oath, the Hippocratic oath they take,
right? Yeah. So one day my mom got up at 5 a.m. and threw on a hat and went and got him Haribo peaches, and they were hidden on the bottom shelf of the supermarket, and she almost told a supermarket lady the whole story, and it was ridiculous.
What a woman, though. Well done, Mom.
I know. She was really wonderful. She's always wonderful, but she was definitely, it definitely is one of those moments where you go, oh, my mom really will do anything for me. So that was wonderful.
My parents moved in with me when Ben died, and they stayed with me for 3 months.
Oh,
And I will never ever forget that.
yeah.
That they wrapped me up in the kind of parental love that I so needed and helped me parent the children when I wasn't able. So
Gosh.
yeah, mums and dads, and
And dad. Yep. Yep.
anybody that helps.
I know they're wonderful. Well, and speaking of moms, or mums as you guys so lovely say it, so one of the things that was really hard was that Mike did not want anyone with him except me, including his mom, which of course was so hard for her. And it was out of love because he didn't want her to be in pain of seeing him like that. But I had to basically tell her she couldn't come. And we had lunch because they made me leave for an hour a day while he was, under care. So we had lunch, and it was a painful lunch. We're friends. We love each other. But I had to reiterate that, that was his wish. And she was so graceful with me. She was so kind. But luckily, when we were gone at lunch, the volunteer that was sitting with Mike, when I got back home, she said, he keeps asking for his mom. And I said, are you sure? Because he was in and out of consciousness. And the fact that he asked for her made me feel like even though he had made this decision before, that now we could honor his new request. So his mom did get to go and say goodbye. And I'm so grateful because obviously that was what I would want for her. And it was painful to me to keep her out of saying goodbye to him, but he did ask for it, and I was so grateful that I was able to honor his wishes in the way that he wanted, and also provide her that opportunity to say goodbye. So they got to do that, and then he finally, he was very restless, and it was hard to keep him in the bed because even though he was sick, he had a lot of muscle still, and he thought he could move around, and he couldn't. And at one point, he was fairly sedated, and it was just me and my mom in the house. And my mom said, I don't care what happens, but if I hear yelling or if I hear, I'm going to come down, even if he didn't want me to, because I need to make sure that you're okay. And so at one point, I went in to see how he was doing, and he sat straight up in bed, and he was under sedation. He sat straight up in bed, raised his fist in the air, and started yelling the 80s hair band song, Rock Me Like a Hurricane. And
Not, I suppose.
I know. And I had to tell my mom and say, he's okay. He's just having a rock concert. And she teased me and she goes, get me a t-shirt. And so...
I love him.
Yeah.
Hearing you talk about this sort of one last day, the surge phenomenon, we talked about this a little bit because John's first wife, Sarah, she had this phenomenon happen, and they went out for the day shopping. She had her makeup on, and there's a wonderful video of her sort of singing in the car. And I might reshare it actually because it's very powerful, because she looks very thin and very gaunt, but you wouldn't know. And that little glimmer of hope, or a little look at what might have been under different circumstances, yes, it's lovely to see, but it's like a tease, a torture, isn't it? It's a little extra, look what you're going to lose kind of thing.
Yeah. And so I think that was the last day he was awake, and then we went under more sedation, which we had to do under a doctor. 8 days. We did not expect him to last under sedation 8 days. And we really thought he was going to go the day that he went under sedation because his lung was filling up with fluid. And so 8 days later, I was exhausted. Our regular hospital nurse was on vacation during this whole time. And then she came back, I think Monday or Tuesday morning. And so Tuesday, July 26th, she came, and Sarah is her name, and Sarah came, and I went out shopping with my mom because, like I said, they made me leave for an hour a day to do little things. And I bought a tank top.
Normal things.
Normal things,
yeah.
Yep. And I remember buying a tank top, and then Sarah called and said, you want to get back. He's getting close. And so I got back, and after hours of, staring at him and rubbing his hands and rubbing his feet and doing all of these different things. And, oh wait, I have one more story before one more quick.
You do it. It is your story. You tell me whatever you like.
While he was waiting for the final sedation, the one that was going to kind of give him more rest, he was restless, and I kept rubbing his hands, rubbing his feet, trying to make him stay in bed. And I put my arm around him, and he tried to get up, and he said, "I have to go. I have to find my wife. I have to find my wife." And I looked at him and I said, "I am your wife." And he turned around, looked me straight in the eye, and he goes, "You are? That's fantastic."
Oh, I love that.
And that was really probably the last thing he said. Like, I wasn't cognizant and he wasn't fully with it, but I'm just so glad that that's one of the last things he said, because it kind of made me, realize, like, okay, after all this, he's still really happy that he's married to me. So,
well, I don't blame him.
Yeah.
I think many men would be delighted to be married to somebody who loved them so very, very deeply.
Yeah. So that was, one of the last days. And then finally, when Sarah was there, I said to her, "Can I just lay next to him?" And he was in a hospital bed, and we had pushed a twin size bed next to the hospital bed. I laid next to him. I linked my arm through his, and I laid my head on his shoulder, and I fell asleep. And I don't know how long I slept. I don't know if it was 5 minutes or a half hour or more. Sarah came in and she gently woke me up, and she said, "Elizabeth, I think he's gone." And he was. And so I'm kind of grateful that I didn't see his last breath, because I had been watching for so long. And, it was a really, very traumatic. And I love how we say kind of traumatic,
Yeah.
very traumatic. But I got to be right there next to him when he passed. And the recorded time of death was 2:22, and I thought that was really beautiful. And Sarah helped me. Like, when he was under sedation, I had like brushed his teeth and shaved his face. And so we did that again. I got to kind of biblically, help prepare the body. Once he had passed, I shaved his face, and I helped them dress him. He was going to be cremated, and he wasn't going to show, he wasn't going to have an open casket. But before he left the house, we had his mom, my sisters, their husbands, and my parents and our priest over to give a final blessing. And so we did this in the room that he passed in, and it was really beautiful and really touching, and a really beautiful way to say goodbye to him privately for the people who were in his immediate family. And then my immediate family and his mom, but he was very close to my sisters. I have 2 sisters. And then the funeral, home came, and they took him. But before they took him, I was in the room with just him, and I didn't know what to do. And I thought, well, if I just like get in bed and lay on him, like, I don't know. But I did. I kind of laid on him, and he was gone. You could tell, and it was different. And so, because I not to get into too many gory details, but a body feels different when it's no longer living. And I'm really glad that I did that, because I think it really solidified to me that he was gone and that this was no longer him. And so that was he, and we left, and they left and took him, and then a bunch of friends came over, and I drank red wine and threw up. So
I did very similar, actually. Yes, the red wine throwing up seems to be a fairly standard response. The image of the two of you asleep together is just so beautiful, if that's the right word when you're talking about death. But I think it is, and the fact that you were able to go to sleep, and during this time, I don't imagine you were sleeping very well, because you've been incredibly worried and exhausted. And so the fact that you were able to curl up next to your love and go to sleep, and that he was able to leave this world with the person he loved the most so peacefully, it's making me go over here. But it's just, we talk about terminal illness as sometimes giving you that gift of being able to say goodbye, and to give them the gift of a good death.
Yes.
And I'm hearing this here, and I mean, nobody wants to die, but if you're going to go, you want to go wrapped up asleep in the arms of the person you love, don't you?
Yep. And it was beautiful. I mean, it was horrible, but it was beautiful. And I'm really grateful that he got that gift. So,
Me too. Me too. And I'm glad that you got to be there with him as well. It sounds like that was really important for both of you.
sure. Uh-huh.
Oh, goodness me, Elizabeth. As soon as we get to this bit, I'm like, oh, yeah. It ceases to just blow my mind. The pain that we can be subjected to just by virtue of loving people and the injustice of all of this. It's never fair and it's never right. Now, I do like to ask people what they did next. How did you climb out of this horrible pit? What did you do? How have you brought yourself back to life?
Yeah, so it was a lot, but I'm really grateful because, as I've said, I've had a big community and they did not go away. Yes, some relationships have ebbed and flowed. It's been almost 7 years now, so I've had a lot of good people in my life stay around. A lot of people who have, our relationship has changed, but I had a lot of good support. So I definitely leaned on that. My sisters, my mom, my dad, my mother-in-law and I are still very close.
That's lovely.
Yes, but I traveled a lot, and then I kind of simultaneously I had a year that was horrible. We all know how that goes. I loved when you and Lou would talk about the chicken and wine days or whatever. I definitely had a chips and green salsa obsession, and yes, so
it's amazing what you can keep alive on, isn't it? Really,
it's ridiculous. So the first year was bad. I had good support, but I made a lot of decisions that were a little out of character. And then after that, I kind of turned a corner and I started looking at what my life was going to be like. And I changed careers. I went into massage therapy and now I'm a massage therapist. And I also went through a couple rocky type of relationships, but then I met a friend of a friend, and he's not a widow, but I'm now remarried, my husband, Nick. He is wonderful. He is just a gift in this phase of life because I don't know, he's like a mirror, he helps me to be the best me, and he really met me at my worst. And to be met at your worst and loved at your worst is a gift. It's he has given me patience and space and understanding. And not, I mean, it's not one-sided. We give that to each other, but in the first 2 years or so that we were together, there was a lot more, patience and space and understanding on his side. So then, you give it back to someone when you're in a relationship. But
and that's what relationships are like.
Yes.
One of you is strong while the other needs support, and then it goes round, and we sort of that's a partnership, isn't it? It's supporting each other through difficult times, and he must have known what he was getting into.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of our dear friends told him, she's like, oh, I'm going to introduce you to my friend someday, but right now she's a little crazy, so we'll wait. But I
love crazy.
Oh, I know. Well, I have to laugh. The first time we met was at a concert, and our friends, through different circumstances, had abandoned us. And so we were alone together at this concert, and my credit card got declined. I lost my car key. Everything that you could, so he paid my really high bar tab because I had been buying drinks for my friends. And so he paid my ridiculous bar tab. He, helped me find my car key. He waited in the cold with me. And then he ended up, because he was a friend of a friend, I knew he was a safe person. He ended up coming home with me, and we talked all night, and our first fake date, lasted until 1:00 in the afternoon the next day because we just enjoyed ourselves. I was looking for something more casual, and so I jokingly call him my failed one night stand because
Well, I have to say,
Wait,
John and I were the same. When we sort of felt this kind of frizz on of attraction, we sort of thought, well, let's just be friends,
yes,
and you cannot fight the heart, can you? The heart wants.
no, can't. And no, and he's just wonderful and has really respected. I know we talk about a lot, you guys talk about when you are dating or married to another widow, you have that level of like respect and understanding. But I'm really very grateful because even though Nick has not lost before, he understands as much as he can what I've, maybe he
Yeah,
doesn't understand firsthand, but he asks questions. He talks about Mike. He's, had lunch with Mike's mom. She came to I mean, half of our wedding was family and friends from all three of us. So, it was, he has very much allowed space for Mike and for me and for all of that. And you know, I like to think I wouldn't be with someone who didn't, but it's also easier to, say that than do that. And he really has stepped up to that in a beautiful way that doesn't feel, you know, yeah, it doesn't feel forced. He just kind of flows with it. And I've asked him many times, like, does this bother you? Do we have to? And at first I didn't care because obviously we were at a different stage in our relationship. But later
yeah.
really wanted to respect him as my partner. And, he has just really rolled with it and is just such a wonderful addition to my life and the life that we have now. And we got married in 2001 or 2021. Woo! See, we had a huge outdoor COVID wedding and we invited, his huge family, my huge family, and then a ton of the, brothers I had previously mentioned of Mike's. A lot of my friends with Mike were at our wedding, and it was just a beautiful celebration of kind of a thank you from me to the people who had supported me, and then also kind of a celebration of this new community with all of us. And it was really a really beautiful day and just, yeah, just everything you could ask for, except it was really hot. But, but
When was it? Just out of curiosity, when was it?
it was August
August.
21st.
It's
Yep.
it's listening to you say this, and I'm nodding along like a nodding dog in a car because, as you are probably aware, John and I got married in lockdown, so it was just the two of us
Yeah.
kind of ran off. But then we had a party, an outdoor party at home, and we had a band, and we had Sarah's family, and we had Ben's
Oh,
friend, and some of his family, and very similar. We had a band and a dance floor outside, and I've got this wonderful picture somewhere of like a lot of my widowed friends just free on the dance floor, and it, because of everything the world had been through, it felt partly a celebration of our love and our second chance at life, but also it felt like just a celebration of life and everybody coming
right.
together. And it was so, I don't know, it was just really wonderful. I can't think of a better adjective really, but this kind of coming together of people after so long, and also to include people from, you're right, there's so many aspects of our lives now. We're not a single, faceted person. We come with, our late partner and their family and their friends. They form who we are. So I love the fact that you included them. I think that's really magical.
It was really beautiful. So yeah.
And is there anything major you would like to include?
I think just that I'm really grateful to, if this had to happen, I'm grateful that I have the life I have now. It's no one asks for this, but I'm really grateful to have been Mike's wife, to have had his blessing in moving forward in my life, to have the experiences that I have now, and to also have a bright, big life that includes a new love. So I'm really grateful.
I described myself as lucky the other day.
Yes.
As I said it, I sort of flinched because it's not a word I associate with the last 5 years, if I'm honest with you, Elizabeth.
Right.
But I'm very lucky because I was loved so purely and so truly and completely by Ben. He just was, my biggest advocate and fan and support and my best friend. And I never in a million years thought I would ever find that again. And I was very resigned to a life alone, really, because I didn't want to replicate what I had or have less. And then John, turned up in my life, and it turns out there is more than one wonderful man out there, and it is so none of us really want to be alone. You know, some of us do make the choice to, but as human beings, if you do find love and they treasure you and value you in this way, then, oh my God, don't you want to be part of this, you know? And I say it often, it's not the path that we chose, but it is the one that we're walking, and you can do it under this cloud and gloom, or you can pull your shoulders down and lift your head up and stare up at the sun and try and grab the best out of what you've got left.
Mhm. And I mean, that's the way to do it if
Yeah.
you can.
And it sounds like Mike had this attitude as well. You know, you can hear how much life he squeezed out of what he had left. He was so determined. And I don't view it as disrespecting their memory. I view it as honouring their memory, because
Exactly.
they, you know, we're safe and we're happy and we're loved. And my God, isn't that what you want for somebody that you love?
Yes. Oh, I guess there is one thing I'd like to add, that we did honor Mike and his sense of community and competition. We rehabbed a basketball court in his honor. So we raised money and worked with the city, and in his old neighborhood, we completely recreated, or renovated a basketball court that is now the Mike Sanders Memorial Basketball Court. And so that's his memorial.
That's lovely. I love that idea. We're sort of umming and ahhing about possibly getting in the UK. We often have benches with people's
Yes. Yep.
start and end dates, for want of a better description, and messages. And I like the idea of we're kind of stumbling over where to put it, really, because I love the idea of the kids being able to go, and we would have one dedicated to them both. That they can go and sort of sit and think a little bit. So, yeah, I think you've kind of inspired me to go on and do a little bit of looking into this, because I do think it would be lovely to have a sort of permanent legacy.
Yeah, it's helped a lot.
It does. I think stuff like this, it does help. I've got although, as you must be aware, Ben's body was then found, I have a memorial at a church. I'm not religious, but I wanted a permanent place that we could go and that other people would see it and think of him, because I do think it's important that we have that.
I agree.
Anyway, Elizabeth, it has been just wonderful to talk to you. The love and the joy that you two shared, and the attitude that you have demonstrated in recovering from this enormous trauma and devastation. And, you talk about this first year where it all kind of goes to shit a bit. And you almost have to do that, don't you? Because anybody that's coping too well too early on, I'm a bit suspicious of.
Right? If you don't have the red wine and the chips, I don't know.
You've not been sick this week. Right. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me. I have made copious notes of things I want to talk to John about in our kind of catch-up session after we release this, because I hear quite a few similarities in your story and with John and losing his wife. So I'm very interested to get his perspective on this. And it's been an honour to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful to talk to you too. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
You take care of yourself and keep grabbing life by the balls.